Welcome to Electric Perspectives, a podcast that explores the innovations and policies shaping the electric power industry and how America's electric companies are delivering the resilient clean energy we need to strengthen America's energy security and power our daily lives. This show is brought to you by EEI, the Edison Electric Institute, which represents all U.S. investor-owned electric companies. I'm your host, Brian Reel. As electric companies work to build the transmission lines and infrastructure needed for a reliable energy future, they face complex and often lengthy approval processes. Reforming these processes is essential for electric companies to deliver reliable energy while keeping bills at the lowest cost possible for customers. Joining us today are Drew Maloney, President and CEO of the Edison Electric Institute, and Krista Tanner, President of ITC Holdings, which is the largest independent electricity transmission company in the United States. We'll discuss why permitting reform is so critical and what's being done both in Washington and across the country to make sure electric companies can meet rising energy demand and maintain grid resilience. So, Drew, why are EEI and our member companies focusing on permitting reform now? And more generally, how do delays in permitting processes impact projects and ultimately cost to customers?
Well, Brian, there's an incredible amount of demand for new energy that we need to meet as quick as possible. We need less red tape from Washington going forward and the freedom to build this infrastructure. Just as an example of the time it takes to build transmission and generation, it can take 6 to 12 years just to get that onto market. In China, it takes 1 to 3 years. The length of time to address this demand ultimately hurts customers and hurts reliability. That's why we're leaning in and really supporting reliability and permitting reform here in Washington.
And Krista, what are your thoughts on just the urgency of the challenges that companies are facing today?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with Drew more. We're really at a critical time in our country's history. We are in a global race for energy security, AI innovation, and also economic development. And it just takes way too long to build in this country, as Drew stated. So we have an example where we had a project take almost 13 years, and that's unacceptable. Drew mentioned China, where they can build by decree, so I'm not suggesting we do that. We don't do that in this country. We shouldn't. But we absolutely can modernize our processes and get this built much faster.
And it is always helpful to have that real-world example. So could you tell us a little bit about your experience with the Cardinal Hickory Creek project, which I don't know if that's that 13-year one you're referring to, but what was that experience and how does that inform how you're thinking about opportunities to improve the process?
Yeah, that is the example I was talking about. So Cardinal Hickory Creek was approved by MISO in 2011, and it was one of MISO's MVP projects. So for your listeners who aren't familiar with MISO, that's the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, and they plan and operate the grid in the upper Midwest. And the MVPs are multi-value projects, so they're very aptly named because they, in fact, provided multiple values. And they provide economic value, reliability, and resiliency, and they were really groundbreaking at the time. As an aside, they were full at capacity the minute they were built, so maybe a subject for another podcast can be that we're not planning big enough. But back to the permitting piece, Cardinal Hickory Creek ranged from Dubuque, Iowa to Madison, Wisconsin. So already it was complex because we needed approvals from 2 states and the federal government, because it also traversed the upper Mississippi Wildlife Refuge and also the Mississippi River. So we had to get 33 permits from 15 different agencies. And some of those being federal processes required the NEPA process. So the NEPA process took 7 years. And we engaged in those processes. We engaged landowners. We had 29 public engagement opportunities, and those consisted of public information meetings, open houses, comment periods. So we took all of those comments, took them to heart, built a very responsible project, over 90% existing rights of way. We had a smaller impact on the refuge than when we started. It was just a very environmentally responsible way to build a project. And we got approvals because of the way we did it. And that's when the litigation began. And then the project was subject to 5 different lawsuits, 4 different injunctions. And so it really extended the process even longer. We ultimately prevailed, but at the end it took 13 years, which, is way too long. And the result was that there were, customers didn't receive the benefits. You had 24.5 megawatts of generation waiting on this. And so while this process dragged on, customers were deprived of low-cost energy and a resilient grid.
And you talked about litigation. Was that from those local communities that you were working with, or was it some outside stakeholders as well?
So early on in the process, certainly there were landowners involved. By the end, it was really environmental groups that were not impacted by or were not adjacent to the refuge, but they were using the federal process as a way to stop the project.
And Drew, you recently wrote a letter to Congress advocating for permitting reform. What are some of the specific elements of what you were suggesting to Congress, and really why is now the time for Congress to be thinking deeply on some of these issues?
Well, Brian, I think what Krista just said highlights the challenge that we're facing in America. And the fact that a project like hers took 13 years, and you multiply that by many other projects throughout the country that are having the same results, that is unacceptable today. And we will never be able to meet the power needs of our customers if this continues. And that's why we sent our letter to Congress. And we really called out for several items. One is to streamline the National Environmental Policy Act, which is NEPA, that ensure that we don't have this endless litigation that keeps going and going. Strengthen and extend the nationwide permitting under the Clean Water Act, Section 404, which already is working, and we just need to codify that. Expedite state water quality certifications under the Clean Water Act. Right-size the National Historic Preservation Act so you can properly balance preservation goals and the deployment of new energy infrastructure. And finally, just fully fund the national labs as we work together with them to develop these new and emerging technologies that provide value across the grid. And the why now? The why now is very simple. These basic reforms will do several things. One, they will keep customer prices lower. Two, they will help increase reliability. And three, building the new generation and transmission that we need for additional manufacturing, expanding small businesses, and to support the technology development that is so critical to the United States.
And there really is a cost impact for the time, right? When these projects get drawn out further.
Yeah, the cost delays, if you think about a project that was supposed to be completed in 3 years and it takes 13 years, your whole supply chain costs are going to go up. The fact that the customers aren't going to receive the benefits for 10 more years means additional costs. So I think people don't appreciate how much the delays and the litigation, because ultimately the customers get stuck with paying the price for all of this over the long haul.
The cost to an injunction is also, not only do they incur the cost of the delay that you just mentioned, but it's very expensive to mobilize and then demobilize crews. And the other thing, when you're building a transmission line in sensitive areas, sometimes you can only build in certain parts of the year because of environmental habitat. And so if you get an injunction and then it gets lifted, you might have to wait months and months again before you can start. In the example of Cardinal Hickory Creek, that occurred over the pandemic and then supply chain challenges. And so had we been able to finish it sooner, we would have avoided those cost escalations. And so it really compounds upon itself. There's no value to it. It's just costly delay that the customers don't get the value from.
And to dig a little deeper from ITC's perspective, what are some of the process opportunities that you all see can be enhanced, improved, streamlined?
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with all of the suggestions that Drew just made. I would just say at a high level, the federal NEPA process is way too open-ended. So we really need guardrails around what needs to be reviewed, how reviews should be conducted, and how courts should oversee those challenges. So what needs to be reviewed? Not everything needs to go through a NEPA process. And I think projects that don't cross federal lands is a really good place to start. So I think we can narrow the scope of what's reviewed. How we conduct those reviews, I think, can also be streamlined. For example, not every project goes through a pristine area. I mentioned Cardinal Hickory Creek. It traversed existing rights-of-way, and so maybe that doesn't need that same level of review. And then finally, how those courts should oversee those challenges. We would advocate for a super venue, or in other words, a court that's specialized and understands this and can review cases quickly. Raise the standard for injunction. I mentioned Cardinal Hickory Creek was enjoined 4 times, yet we ultimately prevailed on the merits. And so really it should not have been stopped at those junctures. So I think we can definitely put some guardrails, because I want to be clear, no one's advocating for no judicial review. Everyone deserves their day in court. We want to do this the right way. We want to do right by the environment, the communities we serve. We can do that and modernize and streamline our current system.
And Drew, having examples like this and strong policy recommendations like your letter and what Krista was just explaining, how important or impactful is it to be able to go to members of Congress and their staff with these solutions, not just with problems?
Well, Brian, you don't win in Washington without solutions. So that is why we really leaned forward and highlighted the need to deliver on permitting reform. Our members understand that the most critical thing we can do is provide affordable and reliable power to our customers. And this has to be a priority. And not only are we working closely with the administration on and policymakers in state governments and then the federal government on permitting reform, but we work on mutual assistance programs, cybersecurity issues, supply chain challenges. This is what we're focused on, and we're offering solutions to all these things in order to improve the customer experience.
And let's talk a bit more about strategies to help set up infrastructure projects for success. Krista, how do you approach community engagement, which you touched on a little bit before, but gathering feedback, building those relationships with local and state officials? I imagine doing that work up front does help make the process a bit smoother.
Absolutely, it's critical. So we operate in 8 states, and every state has different rules. But I would say at their core, every state does require some level of public engagement. We try to go above and beyond, and we try to engage stakeholders very early in the process to make sure that the route we're selecting has minimal impact. We engage landowners. We engage environmental groups to avoid environmentally sensitive areas. We engage community leaders because they're going to hear about the project from their constituents, and we don't want them to be surprised. And we engage our employees and our labor friends who are building the projects because they live and work in these communities, and they're really the trusted resources that neighbors are going to ask about the line. And so we try to bring everyone from our employees to our landowners to community leaders on board, and it's really critical.
And in addition to the grid reliability and affordability benefits, I imagine these projects also have more direct community impacts.
Oh, absolutely. Well, there's, as you noted, economic development, property taxes, but then there are just, so many great stories about individuals. So, we've been talking about Cardinal Hickory Creek, and I recently attended a celebration event. And Nick Weber with the IBEW Local 953 told a story about a local diner in Montfort, Wisconsin. And like a lot of restaurants post-pandemic, it was kind of slow coming back. And because of the infusion of the workers who were working on the line, they went from a very slow lunch period to having to go to only serving one menu item a day because they couldn't handle the crowd. And so to go from wondering if your business is going to make it to having so much work, that you almost can't handle it is a really great story. And I think we forget about that there's really real people and communities who are impacted by this influx of work. And the workers are temporary, but then at the end, you've got a resilient, reliable grid that's going to enable economic development and new projects in your community. So it really matters, and we're really proud of the impact we have.
So thinking about the workforce, obviously they're essential for these sort of construction jobs. As you think about these policy issues with lawmakers here in Washington, how essential is the workforce aspect of it?
Our industry supports about 7 million jobs currently, and over the next decade, it's expected that we're going to have to add 30 million new energy workers to our communities out here. And, we have partnered at EEI with the Center for Energy Workforce Development to raise awareness for these jobs. We're working with high schools and colleges to develop curriculums to educate people, to highlight the needs that we're going to have. And the needs are everything from a line worker to cybersecurity experts to people that can implement AI technologies to accountants. We need the full spectrum of workers in the utility and power company business. And we are really focused on trying to meet that need and let everyone know that there are really well-paying jobs in the energy community that everyone should be a part of.
Are you optimistic about the progress that's being made, Drew?
I am. I feel like we are at a very unique inflection point, I think, as Krista said before, that we are poised to win the AI race, bring back more manufacturing jobs to the United States, and keep prices affordable. And we need to address this antiquated permitting process. And that's why I think we've seen bipartisan support on Capitol Hill to address these issues. And I'm very optimistic that at some point over the next 12 months that we are going to see some progress, and hopefully a bill gets passed in the House and Senate and makes it to the president's desk, because we won't continue to deliver those results for our customers if that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I agree. We have to be optimistic. This is just too important to get wrong, and we're at a critical time in our history, and we've got to win the AI race. We've got to bring manufacturing back. We've got to support all these American jobs, and we can't do it without permitting reform. And I think our leaders know that. And so I do think, as tough as sometimes some bipartisan agreements can be, I think this is too important to get wrong. And I'm confident that our leaders will rise to the occasion.
Well, thank you so much both for spending some time with us today and really for the work you're doing. And again, it's really great to have these examples of projects and making sure that we all are learning from your experiences.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me.
Great. Thanks, Brian.
That's our show for today. Thank you for listening, and be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, or wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about EI's members and the electric power industry, visit our website at electricperspectives.com.